Well, hello, and welcome to our continuing devotional through the book of Colossians. In the last, several paragraphs, the Apostle Paul has been dealing with relationships, and particularly focused on relationships within the church with your fellow Christian. Now he's speaking about relationships between, first of all, in the family. First of all, relationships between husbands and wives, but then relationships between parents and their children, and then in later verses in this chapter, relationships between in the commercial world between bosses and employees, or what he will say is called slaves and masters. We'll look at that in a little bit. But let's start with Colossians 3:18, verse 21, which say this: Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord, and husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. And fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. So he starts off in verse 18 by saying, Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. This is one of the verses that people often kind of find offensive, or they try to reinterpret it or find some way around it because, I think they think wrongly about what it means, and they're kind of reading into it some misuse that some people have had of wifely and husband relationships. So they immediately, when they see wives submit to your husbands, they think of this domineering dictator husband who's treating his wife like a child and commanding her to do this or that, and that somehow Paul's saying that's okay. And that's not the case at all. Every part of life has leadership. I mean, if you're on a plane, there's a pilot and there's a co-pilot, and there's flight attendants, and there's different hierarchical leadership. It doesn't mean it's abusive in any ways, but life only works if there's leadership. We have leadership in the schools. We have leadership in business. We have leadership in our politics. You even have a leader when you're in a car. Somebody has to have the steering wheel, and you can't have two people having the steering wheel. Well, God's ordained order is for the husbands, not male, female, not men to dictate to women. It doesn't say that, but husbands, wives, where the wife chooses to readily submit to her husband's leadership, not his abusiveness, not his misuse of that, but in the sense that she understands, there has to be a leader, there has somebody in charge, and God has chosen in his wisdom that this will be the case. So he says, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord, which means don't make life hard, don't be resistant, uh, don't demand and insist upon your own way all the time. And husbands, if they're smart, their wives will recognize that God has called us to be partners with our wives and given us them because of their wisdom and their insight, and we work together. But there does have to be leadership in the home. At the same time, it isn't like Paul only speaks to wives. He tells husbands who did tend to be in that culture abusive and domineering and indifferent to their wives. He says, husbands, love your wives. Love them. Treat them with respect and kindness. Put them first above your wants and your desires, and do not be harsh with them. Don't use your physical size or your aggressive voice or the fact that you have a position of authority in society in an abusive way, but you're a follower of Christ. Be kind, be gentle, be patient, sacrifice for them. In the book of Ephesians, Paul tells husbands to treat their wives and to love their wives as Christ loved the church, to sacrifice for them. So this is not your normal worldly leadership model where I'm in charge and you serve me. In the Bible, leaders are those who serve those who they lead. They sacrifice for them. That's what husband leadership means. Then, of course, just like in every relationship, there's continues that understanding of authority. He says, children, you're under authority too. Obey your parents and everything. Not many people disagree with that one, And when he says everything, he doesn't mean if they encourage you to do something sinful. That's obvious. But in general, children, obey your parents. That pleases God. Honor your father and mother. It's the fifth commandment. But then he also goes to the other side of it. He knows that sometimes, particularly fathers, sometimes they can be too aggressive, too demanding. They can discourage their children by, expecting them to act like little adults. He says, Father, do not provoke your children. Don't exasperate them. Don't drive them nuts by being overly demanding, lest they become discouraged. Bring them up in a healthy, kind, loving environment where they respect authority, but you recognize that they're still children and there's an immaturity and they need to grow in obedience. So hopefully you'll consider these things and understand that God has a plan that works for marriages and that works for parental child relationships. I hope you will choose to trust him and follow that plan. Have a blessed day.